Tonight we are in Job chapter 23. We're just going to jump right into the book. It says, verse 1, Then Job answered and said, Even today is my complaint bitter, my stroke is heavier than my groaning. And so Job is saying my stroke, or the New King James actually says, my hand is listless because of my groaning. And you could even, I know the teacher that I had in school had mentioned that Job, of course, thinks that this is from God, this destruction is from God, and he mentioned the stroke of my destruction. Whatever the case is, the idea here is very simple. He's saying that I've been complaining about this. They've been upset about his complaining, and yet he's actually saying here, look, I could be groaning out much more than what I am. I've been destroyed, and I'm not complaining nearly as much as what I could be. Verse 3, Oh, that I knew where I might find him, that I might come even to his seat. And so he wants to appear and talk to him. Now look at chapter 22 and verse 21. This is a reference back to here. It says, Acquaint now thyself with him, and be at peace, thereby good shall come unto thee. And so, of course, this is a reference here to God, but he's saying, look, I just wish I could talk to him. I wish I could plead my case. Verse 4, I would order my cause before him and fill my mouth with arguments. So Job has grown here. He's got this idea that, look, if I could just set out my complaint before him, I could show him all the things that are upsetting me, and show him how I have not deserved these things. But he could not answer him, and now, of course, he wants to go before him. And he says, and fill my mouth with arguments. He's saying, I want to have a fair trial here. I want to be able to talk to God and show him my part of this. Now, it's kind of an interesting statement, and because of what we know of God, we know that really, fairly simply put, we know that God knows our troubles. He knows what is going on with us. And so Job is saying, I want to put forth what, I want him to hear. Now, of course, God already knows that. But that's the idea that Job has right here. I want a fair trial. I want to be able to stand before God, and I want to give him the things that have been bothering me. Verse 5, I would know the words which he would answer me, and understand what he would say unto me. He would basically, he would understand. He would know the words and the way that he would answer. And he would not mistreat him. Job knows that God is righteous, and that God is going to talk to him and help him to understand these things. Verse 6, Will he plead against me with his great power? No, but he would put strength in me. And so he's saying, look, he's not going to take advantage of me. He's not going to take advantage of me. All the things that I've gone through, he's going to help me to understand them. And then he would strengthen me. He would give me courage. He would encourage me. Verse 7, There the righteous might dispute with him, so should I be delivered forever from my judge. And so the idea here, of course, is that he might be able to reason with him, and then he might be able to get out of his situation. Now, of course, what his friends have been saying this whole time, all you got to do is repent. All you got to do is make things right with God. And, of course, he knows that he's right with God, that he hasn't done anything. And so that's why he's saying, I wish I could just talk to God. I could get these things out, and I could reason with God. And he is upright, and he would know my situation, and I would be acquitted of these charges, basically. And, of course, we know that, his time to be able to talk to God is coming. Verse 8. Behold, I go forward, but he is not there, and backward, but I cannot perceive him. You think about this. This was in my notes from being in school. You think about the different points of a compass. You can go anywhere that you want, front, back, left, right, doesn't matter. He's saying, look, I could go forward, but I haven't found him there. I could go backward. I cannot perceive where he is. Of course, we know that God is omnipresent, and he is everywhere. But Job's saying, look, I can't find him if I tried. He can only let himself be known to me. Verse 9, on the left hand where he doth work, but I cannot behold him. He hideth himself on the right hand, that I cannot see him. God is not accessible to Job at this point. Job, of course, is wanting to plead his case if he were here, but he cannot see him. He cannot find him. He cannot present himself unto God. And so the idea is that he would be able to, if he could just see God, he could tell him all these things. And yet he can't find him anywhere, and so he has nobody to plead his case to. Verse 10. But he knoweth the way that I take. When he hath tried me, I shall come forth as gold. This is probably a really good verse to think about when it comes to the book of Job. It says that he knoweth the way that I take. Now, what is he saying? He knows who I am. He knows what I've done. He understands who I am. He understands what is going on with me. And so Job realizes that he's going to come out of this, and he's going to be better for it, because he says, I shall come forth as gold. Look, I don't know why I'm being tested, but I know that in the end that I'm not going to be punished for all this. I am going to be on the right side, and I'm going to come out pure gold. Verse 11, my foot hath held his steps, his way have I kept, and not declined. And so he knows that he has followed God, and Job is saying just like that. I want to make mention of this. Of course, we're putting this in the group and not on our public page, and I've had some people question about that, and I wanted to, at this point, to kind of show you what we've been saying this whole time, and why that coincides with why we have made this video private instead of a public video. Well, technically it is public. You can go to YouTube and watch this video, and maybe someone's doing that right now, but the point that I want to make is very simple. We have been in quarantine for a little while, and we're just trying to get back to some normalcy, try to keep going forth with Job, because it is a long book, and we're spending a lot of time on it, but we want to go through it as quickly as we can. Now, if you recall, when we started this way back in the fall, that we mentioned then the first few chapters were going to take a little bit of time to develop, because there's a lot of new things coming up. There's a lot of background information to the book, and then there's a lot of information concerning what is actually going on in the beginning of all these things, and there's lots of little tidbits of information. And then we start in with the friends, and the friends make their initial arguments, and so everybody starts making their argument. Well, you get past a few chapters into the book of Job, and guess what you have until we see God here at the end? It's just a lot of these friends talking to Job, and Job answering them, and they go through all their arguments, and then Job starts talking, and then it's a back and forth, and what's happening is the same things are being said over and over and over again. And that doesn't mean that we should just skip over it, because there are little things that we glean from all these verses. But the reason we've made this private is because, well, people would be jumping in the middle of the book, and so that wouldn't be beneficial for them to jump in at chapter 21 and following, when they would miss, several chapters before. They'd miss 20 chapters. So that wouldn't be beneficial, really, for somebody. But also, I believe having jumped in the middle of this, when you don't have the first part of the book, it really kind of feels shallow. Like, the Bible class is not really saying a whole lot, and we're trying to go verse by verse here. But these things, there's a lot of things that are kind of being repetitive, and we've talked about that before. But that's part of the reason that we're doing this privately instead of publicly, because there's a lot of things that are being repeated, and we're not spending a lot of time on them. When we first saw them, we spent a lot of time talking about these things and trying to understand it, and why are they saying this and why are they doing that. And now we're to the point where we're not doing that anymore. We're trying to just cover the material, and we're not going to be repetitive and say the same things every single time. But this is an argument that's going on, and these people are arguing back and forth. And what happens in an argument? You're trying to state your case, and you make your point, and then the other person comes in, they say something else, and then you're still trying to make the same point. So you come back in, and what do? You pretty much say the same thing. You maybe put a little twist on it, maybe put an illustration here or there so that the person can understand it. And that's really what's going on here, is that we got these little bitty turns and twists and how people are saying things, but still, the same thing is pretty much being said over and over. Now it says, my foot hath held the steps, his way have I kept, and not declined. And again, we've seen this multiple times. Job is saying, I have walked righteously. I have been upright this whole time. I am still trying to do the right thing, and I haven't stopped. I'm not doing anything wicked. I'm still doing what is right. I'm trying to continue on. And the American Standard here, I like it because it says that and not declined here in the King James. The American Standard and the New King James both say the idea of turning not aside, or and not turned aside. So he hasn't left the way of righteousness. He has followed the will of God. Verse 12. Neither have I gone back from the commandment of his lips. I have esteemed the words of his mouth more than my necessary food. So he has gone by the commandments of God. He has not turned aside from them. He's done according to the will of God. Job even mentioned here, look, it is possible to turn aside from God, right? I think this is important for us to understand. And if we had, an infinite amount of time to cover all of these things, then we could go back and talk about this a little more in depth. But people act like that once you become a Christian, that you can never fall away. And if you could follow God under the old law, could you not follow him in the same way that a person could follow today? Well, the reason I ask that question is this. If people say today that you cannot fall away from God, well then, in the Old Testament that must have also been true. But yet, what do we see? Job is saying here, look, I know that it's possible that we could fall away from God. He said, but I've not gone away from his commandments. I followed his commandments. Job realized that it was possible to fall away from these things, but he continued on. He says, I have esteemed the words of his mouth more than my necessary food. So he looked forward to those words more so than he looked forward to eating, right? That is an interesting and very good statement for Job. He's saying, this is the word of God is more precious than food. And if you think about someone being hungry, being very, very hungry, and what do they want more than anything? They want food. They want sustenance. And we know that when it comes down to spiritual things, that those who are spiritually hungry, they are going to continue to satisfy themselves with the Word of God. And so he says, look, I cannot stand to live without his Word. Verse 13, but he is in one mind, and who can turn him? And what is his soul? And what his soul desireth, even that he doeth. And so, who can change the mind of God? There is one God. He is a sovereign God. And who can change his mind? Who can turn him aside? Who can make him change the way that he thinks? Well, really, the idea is that you can't. Whatever God desires, he could have it. And he desires the things that are right and good because that is his nature. Verse 14, for he performeth the thing that is appointed for me, and many such things are with him. So, if you look at the New King James, it says, for he performs what is appointed for me, and many such things are with him. The idea of many such things are with him, the idea is it's not going to get any better here. The things that he wants me to do, I have to do it. I have to follow God's will. I don't have any other option for me. Therefore am I troubled at his presence when I consider I am afraid of him. And so he is great. He is great, and I am troubled at his presence. I would fear the fact if I were to go astray from his teachings. Now, I think one of the things that comes to my mind when we hear things like this, and when we're talking about fearing God, there are really two types of fear when we're thinking about this. One is that initial fear. When we fear God, we're afraid. We don't want to be punished, and we know that there is a hell, and we don't want to go there, and so we initially start to follow God because we're afraid of the punishment that is there. But then there's that fearful respect. We know that he means business, and we need to follow what he says. And I think about this. God is so powerful. He's got the ability to condemn us if we do not follow his will, and he is so great. We ought to really be afraid of these things. We need to be afraid of the judgment if we're in error, and we need to respect him. And so he says, when I consider, I am afraid of him. When I think about terrible things, I could not do these terrible things because, well, God is going to give retribution to those that follow not his will. Verse 16, for God maketh my heart soft, and the Almighty troubleth me. He says, if I were in this condition, we would be terrified. Look, if the natural response to being, basically he's saying, I've been stricken by God. The natural response should be to be terrified. But he says, because I was not cut off before the darkness, neither hath he covered the darkness from my face. Why couldn't I die from all of this experience? Why is it that I have to suffer? Why don't you allow me to die, God? All of this is showing that he is he's kind of becoming a little more. I don't know how I might say it, but has a little more courage in the way that he's speaking, because he knows that he hasn't done anything wrong, and yet he knows that if he had done something wrong, God is able to punish him, and if that had certainly been the case, then at this very point he should absolutely be terrified. All right, we're now going to jump into chapter 24, and I'm going to see if we can't cover this in a timely manner. There's a lot to it, though. It says, why, seeing times are not hidden from the Almighty, do they that know him not see his days? So why does the Lord come with a schedule in which he has court sessions for everyone? Why does he not allow the righteous to come before him and defend themselves? Why can't this be done? Job is saying, why can't we just come before God and speak our case? Verse 2, some remove the landmarks, they violently take away flocks and feed thereof. And so some people, they take the landmarks showing their property lines, they take those away. This is something that was done a lot in times past when they didn't have the sophisticated technology that we have, and so they would take markers. They'd pile up stones and show this is where the corner of my property is, and people that would want to deceive would pick those stones up and they would move them. And it says, so they remove the landmarks. They violently take away the flock. These awful people would come and they would take away the flock and the feed thereof. Other people's the feed of other people's animals. They'd steal their flocks and the things that they would feed those flocks. Verse 3: They drive away the donkey and the fatherless. They take the widow's ox for a pledge. And so a little orphan has this little possession from which he can benefit, such as an ox to plow the field, and these people, they steal it. They steal it from the orphan. This reminds us of what happened with David in 2 Samuel chapters 11 and 12. You have in chapter 11, David and Bathsheba, and the sin all the sins that go along with that. And then in 2 Samuel 12, you have that idea of, that illustration is given to him, a little parable, and it says, look, there's this one man who had that one ewe lamb, and then that was taken away from him, from this man who had all these other lambs. He had this whole flock. And then David was upset, having been a shepherd, and he's upset, and Nathan tells him, "Thou art the man." Verse 4, They turn the needy out of the way, the poor of the earth hide themselves together. So the needy, they drive them out of the way. And God has always made provisions for the needy. And so this is supposed to be something that has some emotional strings attached to it. Verse 5, Behold, as the wild donkeys in the desert go they forth to their work, rising betimes for prey, the wilderness yieldeth food for them and for their children. This is a poor condition, but God is going to take care of these that are poor animals here. Verse 6, They reap everyone his corn in the field, and they gather the vintage of the wicked. They cause the naked to lodge without clothing, that they have no covering for the cold. And so these things are taken away from people that need them, and that they're wandering out. They don't have any sustenance here. Verse 8, They are wet with the showers in the mountains and embrace the rock for want of shelter. They can't get out of the rain. They want shelter, so they're going to go and try to get under a rock, maybe a cave or ledge, that kind of an idea. Verse 9, They pluck the fatherless from the breast and take a pledge from the poor. So the fatherless, we see this a lot. Why is it important about the fatherless being mentioned? The fatherless is mentioned on several occasions because, when you think about a family in Bible times, really throughout all of Bible times, the father's going to go out and he's going to work. He's going to make some sort of an income to be able to bring home food for the family. And it's really very similar today, because if you have one spouse that dies or leaves the family, then that leaves one parent to do all the work, and it's really hard. And especially back in these times, if you didn't have a husband, if you didn't have a father taking care of things, then that was almost a death sentence. And so as they pluck the fatherless from the breast and take a pledge of the poor. So they pledge, but they give them nothing. They don't help them out. They're actually stealing from them. Verse 10, They cause him to go naked without clothing, and they take away the sheaf from the hungry. So they don't get recompensed for the serving. They are starving people, and the things that they have are taken from them. Verse 11, Which make oil within their walls and tread their wine presses and suffer thirst. So they don't give anything to drink to anybody. They're working them like slaves, and these people do not benefit from the work that they do. Verse 12, Men groan from out of the city, and the soul of the wounded crieth out, yet God layeth not folly to them. And so here again, this is a sophisticated argument that we see that has been going on from Job But he's saying, look, there are people doing bad things, and they are not reaping from these bad things like I have reaped. So if you're telling me that I am getting all these things done to me because I need to repent, I've committed some sort of sin, well, you're wrong. I haven't done any such thing. And so men groan from out of the city, and the soul of the wounded crieth out, yet God layeth not folly to them. We sometimes have a hard time why, people are not punished for the things immediately that they have done wrong. I mean, you think about people like Hitler and during World War II. Why is it that God did not stop him immediately, or why didn't he get destroyed before ever the war started? But this is kind of a tricky thing. But he knows that Job knows, I haven't done anything wrong here. I've not stolen from the people. I've not removed the landmarks. I've not done all these things, and yet there are people who do such things, and God does not immediately strike them down either. Job has pretty well answered all of his friends up to this point. Verse 13, They are of those that rebel against the light. They know not the ways thereof, nor abide in the paths thereof. The murderer rising with the light killeth the poor and needy, and in the night is as a thief. So, look, as soon as the light comes, he is, figuring out how to do more wrong. He is, the murderer rising with the light, he killeth the poor and the needy. And then when the night comes, turns into a thief. Verse 15, The eye also of the adulterer waiteth for the twilight, saying, No eye shall see me, and disguiseth his face. And so, this is very similar, I'm sure, to what is going on today with these very things. If someone were wanting to commit this kind of a sin, they would try to hide it. And in these days and times that we're talking about here, with the days of Job, these people that would go off and commit adultery, they wouldn't do it right out in front of everybody. They wouldn't show themselves walking across the street and into someone's house. They wouldn't do that. They would wait until it got dark, and then people wouldn't recognize them because they would disguise themselves, and they would go out and they would do their dirty deeds. Verse 16, In the dark they dig through houses which they had marked for themselves in the daytime. They know not the light. And so these evil people, these thieves at night, they're digging through the houses, and they are trying to keep themselves under the cover of darkness so that they can do their horrible acts. Verse 17, For the morning is to them even as the shadow of death. If one know them, they are in the terrors of the shadow of death. They like the darkness. The darkness hides them. And so they like the darkness. They want to be in the night when nobody can see them, when nobody can see their sin. And yet they don't realize even that God sees their sin. Verse 18, He is swift as the waters, their portion is cursed in the earth. He beholdeth not the way of the vineyards. Drought and heat consume the snow waters. So doth the grave those which have sinned. And so all of them are going to get the results from sin. They have committed sin, and so they are going to get retribution for that. Sin today and pay for it ultimately. They're going to reap punishment one day. Ultimately, they're going to have to pay one day. Verse 20. The womb shall forget him. The worm shall feed sweetly on him. He shall be no more remembered, and the wickedness shall be broken as a tree. And so the womb shall forget him. He's going to die one day. He's going to be forgotten. The worm is going to feed on him. One day he's going to die, and he's going to be fed on by worms. Verse 21, He evil entreateth the barren that beareth not, and doeth not good to the widow. He draweth also the mighty with his power. He riseth up, and no man is sure of life. Ultimately, everyone is going to be destroyed, from the strongest to the weakest. Everybody is going to be destroyed one day. Verse 23, though it be given him to be in safety whereon he resteth, yet his eyes are upon their ways. When we think about this, verse 23, if you look at the New King James, says, he gives them security and they rely on it, yet his eyes are on their ways. And so, these people that are doing wrong, they can do wrong by taking advantage of natural things, but God still sees what is going on. Verse 24, they are exalted for a little while, but are gone and brought low. They are taken out of the way as all other, and cut off as the tops of the ears of corn. They are going to suffer. They are, Job is answering his friends who say, the wicked are not are cut off from their youth. No, they're not. It doesn't matter what they're saying. People do evil all the time, and they are not punished on this earth for it necessarily. Now, verse 25, and if it be not so now, who will make me a liar and make my speech nothing worth? So who is going to refute what I've said? The wicked, in so many ways, reap what they might see as blessings on this earth. All of them are doing wrong. Some become great leaders, some become rich, but then the righteous, they suffer because they want to do the things of God. We're going to stop there at chapter 24 and pick up at chapter 25 next time. I hope that more people are able to see this. I am, like I said, we're trying to make sure that we have some normalcy here, and we want to make sure that people are able to still take part in a Bible class. And so I encourage you that when you're going through these studies, to open up your Bible and to pay attention and read along and try to understand better. That's the thing that is needful for all of us, is to continue to put effort into these things. It's not good enough for us to just sit by and maybe halfway listen to the class, but we need to open up our Bibles as if we were in the auditorium together. I think that if we can do that, that's going to make this so much better. I hope that we only have one more week of having to do this, but nonetheless, looking forward for us all being together again very, very soon, and I hope that you keep yourselves safe throughout the week.